was a horrible diet that went on the table in my house. I mean, just cold cereal was almost all that there was. So I craved a variety, and I craved healthy stuff. You know, a lot of people ask me, how do you know so much about this stuff? And I say, well, there's magic when you have continuity of interest. And so I set out from an early age to figure out how to feed myself, whether that was growing food, stealing from gardens in my neighborhood, or learning to forage wild things. It was any way I could get good, healthy, free food, I wanted to do it. I'm still into the same things now that I was when I was 8, 10, 12, 14. And it allows me to build through the course of my whole life.
Right.
I had so much fun when I got to connect with Samuel Thayer. He is the author of Nature's Garden, and he grew up scrappy, let me tell you. He had to learn how to forage for himself because he really didn't have enough food at home. It was food scarcity in his home. So I'm so thankful that he taught me all about the foods that are right around us, the variety, the freshness, and the wonders of foraging. Check out our conversation.
This beautiful orchard, I think you said you have about 500 acres?
No, 5 acres.
You could tell I'm a city girl who's not good at math. So I'm excited. Sam, a minute ago you said that you had a dream of living off the land. Isn't that how we're all supposed to live and eat?
Well, we all do. Our food all comes from the land for all of us. And so I wanted to curate that relationship myself, you know, starting from when I was a little kid. And part of it was just a fascination with the whole process of where food comes from. And part of it was this idea that I could just go live in the woods and feed myself. And part of it was an emotional response to my childhood. You know, I always felt like my childhood was a guilt trip for my parents having to feed me. And so I was rebellious, and I was like, oh yeah, you don't have to feed me. I'll learn to feed myself. So that's a little bit personal, but it was my rebellion against my upbringing was to feed myself. And there was a horrible diet that went on the table in my house. I mean, just cold cereal was almost all that there was. So I craved a variety, and I craved healthy stuff. And so I set out from an early age to figure out how to feed myself, whether that was growing food, stealing from gardens in my neighborhood, and or learning to forage wild things. It was any way I could get good, healthy, free food, I wanted to do it. And fishing and hunting from an early age too.
That's so amazing. I'm thinking about kids in middle school who are like stealing baseball cards or gum or cigarettes from the convenience store, and you were stealing like the best thing there was to nourish your body, probably.
Yeah, and I know there was some adults that saw me stealing the stuff and just let me. And of course I thought I was getting away with it then, but I realized they probably would have been glad to give me if I had asked. And they recognized more than I think I realized when I was, say, 10 or 12 years old. I can imagine myself in that situation now, a 10-year-old boy taking some vegetables from the garden. I'd probably let them have them.
Now you've written a bunch of books, right? Why? Because you realized you didn't want to just keep it to yourself, all this good information?
Yeah, in my 20s, I realized that I had a lot of information that a lot of people wanted. I started leading walks informally, and it just became more and more formal. And I realized I had knowledge that people wanted, so I had to share it.
So
you know?
I think more and more of us really do want to learn to fend for ourselves, you know? And so it starts with, I guess, getting some land or getting near some land. I live in the city. What do you think I should do?
You need to get familiar with the clean spaces that don't have polluted soil and aren't covered with herbicides and insecticides, and follow them through the year and learn what vegetables you can get from there. Someplace close to your home, there's a whole bunch of food. There are a lot of urban foragers who do it.
Oh, really?
I grew up most of my childhood in the city, a city of 40,000, right? But I foraged in D.C., and I foraged in New York, and I foraged in Chicago. And the interesting thing about urban foraging is it doesn't really depend on the size of the urban area. So a town of 2,000 people or a town of 2 million people have the same plants available. And urban areas actually offer pretty good foraging when you know what to look for.
Right, we just have to get over that fear factor, like we were saying earlier.
Well, the important thing to remember is foraging isn't a skill you learn. It's an agglomeration of skills. You learn one plant, and when you know that plant, you can use it. And so there never should be fear, because you should only be eating things when you're 100% certain of what they are.
Oh, I'm not just going to grab this and be like, you know, and just start eating it.
Right, because you don't know what this is. But I know what it is, so I know that I could eat it. It's a little too old, though. This is a parsnip.
Oh, okay.
We use the very tender young greens of parsnip, but I don't eat them when they're this old. That was
I would just
for
like
show.
to learn by doing a little bit here with you as you identify things, both the things that you've intentionally grown and cultivated and those that are kind of just wild.
All right, well, we're going to start with wild plums, because that's what I was going to do today, is pick some wild plums. We've had 4 frosts and a very windy day yesterday, so the plums are going to be all on the ground. It should be the last picking of the year, but I think there'll be a bunch over there.
Let's do it. How do I know if it's ripe? If it comes off easily in my hand?
They're all ripe now, but the one I gave you was a really nice soft one. But here's a loaded branch if you want to see what it normally looks like when we're picking. This is what all the trees looked like a week and a half ago.
Oh my
gosh. And so,
loaded branch. You're not kidding.
Yeah, and so I just put the branch over and let the plums fall in. Like I said, we picked 115 gallons of plums out of here this year. So this is within my orchard fence, but wild, truly wild plums. However, I like this particular tree, so I've taken cuttings, root suckers, and plant them, and I get the same genetics. We get a lot of flying squirrels in here, and they like to take the plums when they pull the seeds out and just eat the seeds. And then if it was outside the fence, then the deer come along, and then the deer eat the pulp that the flying squirrels left behind. The raccoons do the opposite of the flying squirrels. They suck the nectar like we do and eat the pulp and leave the seeds.
So it's kind of like nature's economy, that there's a role for each animal, right? And something of benefit for each of us.
All over North America, you certainly have plums in the DC area, but they are more common around here.
Yeah.
This is probably the most widespread one, the American plum. There's one in the south, the Chickasaw plum, that likes sandy soil in the south. That's my favorite. Those are outrageously good.
And what do you do with all these plums?
We make fruit leather. We dry the plums after taking the pits out, and then we rehydrate them in water, and then strain off that water, because then it absorbs some of the bitterness of the skin, and then we'll use that in all sorts of, you can make plum pie. We make jam, we make wine. We also will just can the plums in a light syrup. So I take my lightest maple syrup and I mix it 2-to-1 water to maple syrup.
Yeah.
And then I can the plums in that like you do canned peaches.
Oh.
And then throughout the winter, probably 3 nights a week, we'll open up a quart jar of plums and eat the plums. And
is that kind of your dessert?
yeah, as a dessert. And then we take the liquid they're canned in and we mix that with fizzy water as like our after supper drink. The kids love it. I've got the best patch of wild plums I know of now.
Do other people really grow it or no?
Yeah, I mean, quite a few people will put a native wild plum in their yard in this area. In fact, I transplanted a couple from where I used to live that were in the backyard.
It's so fun that you're doing the things, Sam, that you years ago wanted to do. You know what I mean?
It is, and a lot of people ask me, how do you know so much about this stuff? And I say, well, there's magic when you have continuity of interest. I'm still into the same things now that I was when I was 8, 10, 12, 14. And it allows me to build through the course of my whole life upon my childhood fantasies. No, it's satisfying, very much. I mean, I'm eating food that I love. I feel really wholesome about it in a environmental sense and in knowing it's healthy food. And it feels so secure knowing that with all this COVID stuff going on, we weren't even worried. I mean, maybe we wouldn't get to go get ice cream a couple times this summer, and that was about it.
Daddy,
You familiar with hops, the cultivated plant? Oh, smell that. If you know hops, I mean, it's unmistakable.
Smells so good.
It does.
Wow.
So hops is actually native to Asia, Europe, and North America, and is very common in the wild in our region. Throughout the Midwest, very common. Yeah, hops shoots are delicious. in May and June, but now would be a little late for harvesting it for beer making.
I don't even like beer, but I like the way that smelled.
Yeah, it's a wonderful smell. It's a fairly powerful sedative too. I planted this tree. This is its 14th growing season. This is a Honeycrisp. My orchard is totally organic, but beyond that, I try to maintain high diversity of native plants in the orchard. What you can't tell right now is that there's actually wild leeks as a ground cover under this Honeycrisp tree. But they die back. They're dormant this time of year. So in the spring, the wild leeks will be up. So I'm incorporating all sorts of native edibles into my orchard. And then I have a bunch of things that, of course, come in on their own without me trying. So it's kind of a mix of cultivated and wild stuff here in my orchard. I have lots of parsnips in the orchard. I have caraway. I have a big patch of milkweed. And I manage that milkweed for the monarch butterflies, and because we eat the milkweed pods and shoots. And the goldenrod is fighting with the milkweed, but every year I do one mowing when the goldenrod is up, but before the milkweed is up, to knock back the goldenrod to allow the milkweed to dominate that area.
So it kind of reminds me of how Joel Salatin and others do rotational grazing. It's a mix of what the animals would do if they had predators following them. Do you know what I mean? And our management of them so that we get the most out of the land and out of their kind of harnessing their hooves for regenerating the soil. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you do a mix. You don't just say, oh, let's see what's growing here, but you try to also manage it some.
Yeah, and you know, we sort of have a civilized dichotomy between farming and hunting and gathering, but it's a made-up dichotomy. People all over the world live using a whole slew of different relationships to their landscape, and I'm not partial to one or the other, but I want my landscape to be vibrant and full of life and full of healthy food.
How much this will cost at Whole Foods to get an organic Honeycrisp? This is the real deal.
Yeah, and right off the tree. So that's good.
Is it true that apples are refrigerated for months and stuff?
Yeah, to be a major market apple, the apple has to be storable for a year in refrigeration. And Honeycrisp meets that criteria. It's a very good storing apple. But Golden Delicious, Red Delicious, Granny Smith, all those will store for a year and a half, even 2 years in refrigeration. That's why I grew up not liking apples. Red Delicious and Granny Smith didn't do it for me. When I was 19 years old, I ate an apple from this heirloom variety, Wealthy, growing along Lake Superior, and I fell in love with apples. And I kind of have been ever since.
Now that we've just eaten the most amazing apple ever, except for Wealthy, because I know that's the breed that you really liked and made you like apples. Tell me about why you chose the particular apples that you have growing here in your orchard.
You know, it's really hard to find an apple that is very good in flavor, that is disease resistant, that is cold hardy, and that is productive. So I really appreciate that great breeding programs like the Minnesota apple program has bred and selected apples that are just fabulous.
Me too.
So now this is the thing too, though. So I could identify an apple in the wild. But wait, what were you saying about domesticated? So are these apples wild or are they domesticated?
Well, they're cultivated for sure, and then I grew them, and they're domesticated in that they were selected. But you could make the argument that apple is actually not a domesticated species, and that there's no clear line between what is a wild apple in Kazakhstan where they are native, and what is a domesticated apple in some part of the world where they've been transported. There's no clear line between those populations, so it's hard to argue that it's a domesticated crop. But this is a selected variety. And that's a kind of a confusing area. Take, for example, the cranberry. So there are thousands of acres of cranberry farms here in Wisconsin, but the cranberries grown were selected straight out of a wild bog, and cuttings were taken from the original wild plants. That's not a domesticated crop, but it is a cultivated crop. There are a lot of plants in nature that are perfect, and that we find them totally usable for our purposes without having bred them to change their characteristics or their genetic makeup.
But that's what I was going to say. Breeding isn't messing with the fruit or vegetable or plant's DNA. It's not like, inserting spider DNA in a tomato so it lasts longer on the shelf. We're not talking about that.
When you're breeding plants, you're selecting DNA. You're not modifying the DNA. You're selecting DNA that nature itself offers you. So there is a fundamental difference, and I don't like it when people that are proponents of GMO crops pretend that breeding and genetic modification are the same thing, because they are clearly not. I mean, I don't get into that debate very much,
Right.
but I do not like when people are duplicitous as they define things.
Right. There's a difference. And you're not doing genetically modified apples.
No, there are. I do not know of any GMO apples available, because apples are one of the few crops that we buy as a consumer by the genome. So Honeycrisp is the name of a genome, right? And so if there was a genetically modified apple, it would have to be known to the consumer. So I don't think there are any available genetically modified apples.
Well, some of my friends say that plants want to kill us. I know it sounds funny, but what they mean is plants have anti-nutrients that try to defend themselves that way, and it's not good for our bodies to ingest them, kind of. What do you think?
Plants have anti-nutrients. Essentially all plants have anti-nutrients, or what is called xenobiotics, chemicals that are in the food that your body must get rid of. However, we are meant to eat anti-nutrients and xenobiotics. We are meant to have a variety of plants so we don't overload on any one particular anti-nutrient or xenobiotic. And what's wrong with our diets today isn't that there's too much plants, it's that they are too simple and they are the same plants over and over and over again. And our bodies are not meant to detoxify the same chemicals endlessly and in copious amounts.
It's interesting that you say that, because I interviewed Chris Masterjohn and he said the same thing. He said ancestral people ate a variety of flora, you know what I mean? It was a variety of vegetables and stuff. We have just like broccoli and potatoes every week, kind of.
Within walking distance of my house, I pick more than 170 species of leafy green vegetable that our family eats.
Oh my God.
You couldn't find 170 species combined in all the grocery stores in this state put together.
I see what you're saying.
So the variety is what matters. And tannin is a great example. Tannin is an anti-nutrient that if you have enough of it, it can kill you. But also, we are touting the benefits of tannin as an antioxidant. There is a happy medium here. We are supposed to have a lot of plant nutrients and a variety of plant nutrients and not too much of any one particular nutrient. But in today's age, we get to eat whatever we want, whenever we want, in whatever quantity we want, and that's actually not good for us. Just like we need to get exercise sometimes, even when we have to push ourselves a little bit beyond comfort, it would be easier to just sit there on the couch. But we need to get out and move. Sometimes we need to eat foods that aren't the first thing we would want. Our ancestors, for thousands and thousands of years, ate what was in season, and then they ate what was a different thing that was in season later. And it's really important, I think, that our diets mimic that today, and we need a greater variety of food, for sure. This is Nanny Berry. This is a unique fruit. I bet you've never tried one.
I don't think so.
So it's pulpy. Almost like a banana texture or a prune, not juicy at all. Pretty high in sugar for a wild fruit, and a totally distinct flavor. Want to try one?
I do.
The black ones are ripe. This is the last fruit to ripen in the Midwest.
A nanny berry?
Nanny berry, there's multiple species. In this group, many of the others are called black haws. Honestly, this one's got a slight bitter tint to it that
It does.
most of the other ones don't have. But with wild fruit, it's genetically variable. It's not a selected variety. It's variable from tree to tree.
Right.
I still like them though. Your middle name is Angelica, but had you ever seen an Angelica plant?
I don't think so.
Yeah. It's what I call a charismatic megaflora. A big plant that you can't fail to notice.
Huh. Hey, that's kind of like me, right?
Yeah.
Charismatic, can't fail to notice. And you can make an instrument out of it?
Yeah, it's sort of like a cross between a woodwind and a brass instrument. If you make it out of a section of hollow, dry stalk. This is Calamus. Smell that once. Just crush it up and smell it.
Smells good.
Yeah. So that's
Smells fruity almost.
yeah, almost like Fruit Loops.
Yeah. And what would you eat that with? Anything you want, I guess.
Well, we put it in a blender and with water, strain it out, and then use that liquid to make lemonade. We make Calamus Lemonade.
Oh my god.
But you could write a whole book about all the things you could do with calamus. It's probably the most used medicinal herb in the history of the world. Actually mentioned 4 times in the Bible as a trade item.
Really?
Because it's been used for thousands of years for tons of purposes.
It's like everything we need is all around us.
Well, this here is cut leaf coneflower, also called green coneflower, green-headed coneflower, tall coneflower, or cut leaf coneflower. Lots of names. The Cherokee name for it is sochan, and that's what most people who eat it call it. It's just finished blooming, but this is a gorgeous, what we call an edible and ornamental. And it grows wild on the roadsides here. This one just came up spontaneously in my orchard, one little clump of leaves, and I left it in 1 year and it produced all of this.
Wow.
Produces a small sunflower-like seed that's really popular with songbirds, but we let it grow for the young leaves. So, the young leaves first coming up, I can't even really explain that flavor. It's like somewhere between bok choy with I don't know, a hint of pininess to it. Here, you try and tell me what you think. So, a new set of leaves will come up in the fall. So it's got good leaves in the fall and the spring. And I get leaves from here all the way up to late November, till the ground is frozen.
So did you just study around to figure things out? Like you said, it was one plant at a time?
I learned from books, I learned from people, I learned everywhere I could. And the key thing is that when I learned a plant, I went out and ate it, and if I liked it, I kept eating it, and I never forgot. So once you eat something and you're that intimate with it, you're not going to forget it.
But it's not like you're trying to figure out, I wonder what the nutritional benefits are of this plant, right? You're just enjoying it and understanding that we need diversity in our diet.
Well, I wonder about the nutritional composition of the different plants, but most of that information is not available, and I don't really have the capacity to do nutritional testing on all the plants or pay for it to be done. But I know that if I get a good variety of wild vegetables, I'm going to have a really nutritionally dense diet. Leafy greens are the most nutritionally dense foods that we have. And the analyses we have tell us that wild foods tend to be about double as nutritionally dense as comparable produce items that are cultivated. So this is as good as it gets, you know. Wild leafy greens is nutritionally dense food.
Interesting, because the foundation is always talking about nutrient-dense food, but they tend to believe it comes primarily from animal products. But I guess of the plant life, what we want is wild.
You know, traditional agricultural societies all over the world combined domestic animal products with wild plant products. So we've all heard about the Mediterranean diet, but a lot of people don't realize how much the American media and medical establishment has corrupted what the Mediterranean diet actually was. And I've actually read most of the original papers written in the 70s and early 80s where the long-lived poor people in coastal Mediterranean region were identified, and this was puzzling to anthropologists because normally the wealthy people live longer in a society and the women live longer than the men. And in these villages, they were seeing exactly the opposite. And what they found as a common component of the diet was an incredible variety of leafy greens cooked in lard. And this is not something that was popular in the United States. You couldn't say this 30 years ago. But it's nutritionally fabulous. And this plant, Sochan, if you look at the traditional Cherokee methods of preparation, I have several Cherokee cookbooks, and all of them talk about the Sochan greens cooked in lard. That's the traditional way it was eaten, fried in lard. And it's great that way. Nanny berries or black haw, there's about 6 species closely related with similar fruit.
Wait, smile because you have something between your teeth. That's awesome.
Nanny berry. We call that nanny berry tooth. You got it too.
Oh no.
Yeah, this is our last fruit to ripen in the upper Midwest, generally towards the end of September. And bears and grouse really love these because they're sweet, and migrating robins, but I love them too. They're pulpy, not juicy, and they remind me of a cross between prunes and bananas.
Yeah, they taste like bananas to me.
Well, this is dried mushrooms that are just out because we used them recently. These are wild plums that I still have to get labeled and put on the shelf that I just canned. 2 days ago, I'm admitting I'm lazy, I don't have them put away yet. This is the pile of wild rice. We won't eat all that.
Oh my gosh.
Some of that is to sell. There's some of our canned goods. So we have beans and stuff from the garden, as well as forage stuff. This is canned amaranth greens, which I love. Some people don't like canned greens, but man, I love those. We have tomato sauce, blueberry juice.
Oh my god.
That's a luxury. Vinegar that we've made. There's some wine that we've made. Maple syrup, but actually,
Why is this such a lost art? Why don't people know how to do this anymore? I guess we just started buying things canned in the store, not realizing what we were missing, right?
it's so much easier, but there's not the same satisfaction to just buying it. But we store more food dried than canned, for sure.
Oh, really? Yeah, show me your dried stuff.
Well, your pear leather. Here's blueberry, and actually we have I have bulk storage in the freezer over at my office because I don't have room here for everything. But we have we make a fair amount of. This is like 5-6 pounds of blueberry fruit leather.
Oh my gosh, I'm seeing. Wow.
Yeah, you want to try some?
Yeah. This is blueberry leather.
It is just blueberries, nothing else.
It's amazing.
Nobody dislikes blueberry fruit leather. At least nobody I've met.
It just melts in your mouth. I need a moment. You were showing me a variety of grains on your property. One that you said was related to quinoa.
Yeah, so that's lamb's quarter. This is the finished seed. I probably need to winnow it a little bit better, but it's like a dark version of quinoa. It tastes almost exactly like quinoa.
But this is the thing. I feel like the name lamb's quarter is really deceiving because it sounds like it's a hunk of meat. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know. Well, plants have terrible names. I mean, the little nutlets you can eat that are called bastard toadflax. Nobody wants to eat bastard toadflax.
No, it sounds like something that you wouldn't want to get near.
Or choke cherries, which are great.
Oh, yeah. Or beefsteak tomatoes. I'm like, don't pretend you're beef when you're really a tomato. I hate that.
There's some other crazy examples I'm trying to think of. Things we eat that when I tell, carrion flour. The shoots of carrion flour are delicious. But how do I tell people what I'm eating? It's carrion flour.
Because carrion's a bird, right?
Carrion means rotting meat.
Oh,
because supposedly the flowers smell like rotting meat.
Oh no, you're right. Nobody's
to attract flies to pollinate. But we don't eat the rotting meat flowers. We eat the shoots when they first come up.
Right. Oh, that's funny.
So, you were saying a moment ago that it's really important to diversify our diet, but also to eat seasonally. In the winter, nothing's growing. What do you do then?
Well, in the fall, we store lots and lots of food. So we store hickory nuts, butternuts, black walnuts, acorns, hazelnuts. We store lamb quarter seed, amaranth seed, wild rice, lots of wild rice. Sometimes small amounts of other seeds as we get them. We dry different vegetables. We dry nettle leaves.
Wow, you store up so much more than I expected. So seeds, nuts, what else?
Well, we store root vegetables. You know, in November, dig out wild parsnips, Jerusalem artichokes, things like that, and store them in buckets, you know, in the cellar. We also, we dry and we can stuff. We can amaranth greens. We can wild plums, lots and lots of quarts of plums. We can applesauce. We make dried apple rings. We have frozen blueberries. We have blueberry juice. We have dried blueberry fruit leather. We have serviceberry fruit leather. We have, you know, a little bit of raspberries and blackberries. So a variety of stuff, lots of food put up for the winter. And of course, maple syrup is the only sweetener we use.
Right. And then you also have animal products in your diet, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have a couple pigs we're raising now. We hunt deer, rabbits, squirrels, grouse, ducks, and then we raise butcher chickens most years.
Do you even need to go to the grocery store?
We don't need to go to the grocery store, but we do because we get more variety that way. I mean, I'm not an absolutist, I'm not an extremist. I like my dried mango. I mean, there's things that I can get at the grocery store that I can't gather and I can't grow, and I like those things. I grew up eating them, but we don't need to, which is a comforting feeling. We can get a healthy diet right here off of our land, but we still shop, you know, for a fair amount of our food.
Right. Well, this conversation has been so inspirational. I'm going to put a link below so people can find you, find your books and all that. And hopefully the next time we come out here and we're together, I'm going to show you a couple of plants you've never seen before.
That would be great. I learn a new plant in my backyard almost every year.
Really?
Maybe you'll be the next one to show me one.
I was trying to do a little trash talking, but I don't know. We'll see. I'll try to prep and see how it goes. So thanks so much for your time, Sam.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for watching, you guys. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this video. Subscribe so you don't miss a thing, and click on the notification bell so you can be alerted the next time I upload a video. We'll talk soon. Hasta pronto.